articulate in children's drawing in early childhood education and care. And today, Anne will talk about relational awareness in teachers and counselor practices. Thank you, Anne. You can share
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's wonderful to see all of you. Last time I was in this forum was all the way back in 2007 in Hong Kong, and I remember having a wonderful time with those of you who were there. I'd like to share some PowerPoints, but I'm disabled.
Who
is the Sheena, one who
can you allow
your co-host
to share her screen?
Yes. Wonderful. So, here. So now I hope that you can see my slides. The title, as Nurit just said, is Relational Awareness in Teachers and Counselors' Practices. And it's based on a qualitative longitudinal research project in teachers' education in Denmark. The drawing here is made by one of the teachers who participated in the project, and it illustrates what she experienced as a difficult and challenging encounter with a very resistant student in class. So challenges can be of many kinds, and they all deals with emotions. So it was a wonderful presentation Professor Schechman just gave us. I'm very happy for that. I will start with the focus on the professionals. So our qualitative study is on teachers during their teacher education and 1 year after graduation. But I think that some of the dynamics we found will be recognizable for counseling practitioners as well. And therefore, I've quoted Gerard and Soriano, who says that to be an effective school-based family counselor practitioner, you must have a solid grasp of the interpersonal and intrapersonal dynamics affecting a child and her social system. And in a way, the same goes for the teachers or the counselors who are dealing with practices with consecutive interpersonal encounters, of which many of them can be difficult to handle. So how can we grasp that? How can we grasp the interpersonal and intrapersonal dynamics that affects the professionals in their encounters with other persons in school? It's quite rarely in Denmark, at least, and I have not found many studies focusing on that, except studies looking into mindfulness and self-compassion in caring for the professionals. So I'll return to that in a moment. This about understanding the dynamics, it's very important because teachers and counselors' attentive presence and their acknowledging relationship building is so vital for trust and engagement in daycare, in school, and in counseling practices. So this contribution in the context of school-based family counseling focuses on school prevention and interventions, but mostly with an interest in some of the unconscious dynamics that may influence teachers' encounters with children and counselors' encounters with children or teachers, or, for example, the other teachers in school, as well as parents. This about attentive presence is quite difficult because there are increasingly high demands in the school context. And these demands are about being more efficient, being able to perform best practice, always being aware and authentic in your engagement with the students and colleagues and so on. You have to be socio-emotionally skilled. That's a very important part, but it's also a high demand, because how do you do that? You need to be in control, you need to be supportive to the persons you're working with. And that's actually quite difficult because attentive presence is also a demanding capacity. It's a huge resource, but it's also a vulnerable resource. So if we want to identify the capacity for attentive understanding in the intersubjective encounters we are engaged in, then I've looked into phenomenology. And here focus will be on the lived experiences. It resembles the lived experiences in the group works we just heard so wonderfully about. Lived experiences in shared sociocultural contexts, which is a source of the potential intersubjective understanding and the acknowledgement of the other, of your own perspective and of the other's perspective. That goes for teachers in school and likewise for counselors. And it's on this pre-reflective or unconscious capacity that a lot of valuable guidelines for good practice in education and counseling can define potential actions to consciously consider by the practitioners. But what does that mean to consciously consider it and to have guidelines? I've looked into the cultural historical theory, which emphasizes how what is called mediating means. Mediating means is when you acquire, you learn methods of behavior, how to use specific tools, how to change language depending on the situation. Mediating means can be theories or models and specific guidelines and procedures, all kind of means that supports our orientation in sociocultural meaningful ways, supports our understanding of when to be aware and how to express our awareness of something important, and to understand others with empathy and warmth when we engage with them in the existential situations. The sociocultural approach does not give us very much terminology or theory about the pre-reflective or the unconscious dynamics. But here we can look back into a phenomenology-based approach. Here I have brought forward Thomas Fuchs's theory about interbodily resonance and intrabodily resonance. This is in every encounter, we are affected by the affordances or values in the situation. They will trigger a specific resonance, and the resonance in turns influences the emotional perception of the situation. And in that perception, already there is a readiness for a specific kind of reaction. That's the emotion. And the embodied affectivity, it's a very vital part, it's a crucially part of every kind of intersubjective encounter, which is mediated by the feeling body. So that means that intersubjective encounters will always involve the participants' often unconscious patterns of meaning and relationships as they are experienced from early childhood and on, all through life. The embodied conditions, they affect the attentive presence. We all recognize it when we become aware of a sensory experience that disturbs us somehow, feeling tense or feeling transient emotions or effects. And it appears that guidance of participants towards an open and curious awareness of such embodied experiences are common to contemplative embodied practices, some of them labeled mindfulness, some compassion, other kinds of meditations as well. And these practices are found to be very helpful for teachers and care workers in dealing with stressing conditions, and they're found to support their well-being, their attentive presence, and their relationship building. Now I return to the concept of mediating means in Vygotsky's cultural psychology line of thought, because it offers us a lens to look at how embodied practices and terminologies inspired by mindfulness, meditation, and compassion may influence both internal processes and our actions on the world. Then this cultural psychology approach does not say very much about unconscious dynamics. Some people have tried to integrate a sociocultural approach, a phenomenology approach, and a more psychodynamic approach. Here I've looked into the cybernetic systems psychology, but it's strongly influenced by psychoanalysis and psychoanalytical therapeutic procedures. In this line of thought, the unconscious dynamics will always be based on patterns of resonance and intuitive meaning acquired through lived experiences. And that means that we have the opportunity to become aware of the dynamic processes of the pre-reflective resonating when we are able to be aware of our impulses, intentions in the situation, how we are being aroused, how we experience affectivity and emotion. And when we immediately think, now we understand what is going on, perhaps without really trying to assume the perspective of the other. So what I will introduce to you now is a qualitative study in which we studied how methods of behavior to become consciously aware of lived experiences in embodied mediating means, guided by a contemplative embodied practices in mindfulness-like practices. It was not labeled mindfulness at that time, but that's what resembles best. How it was experienced by students, teachers, and newly educated teachers in practice when they worked in school settings. So the question here was, how did teachers experience the significance of contemplative practices in their intersubjective encounters in school settings? School teacher education in Denmark lasts 4 years. And as you can see here, we began the study in 2012, and we followed the student teachers through their education. And after they graduated, we did individual interviews with 9 of them who were in jobs in complementary school. All through their education, we followed with participant observation what was going on in this special intervention with contemplative practices, and how did the student teachers engage in it. And twice we did focus group interviews with groups of the student teachers. Some of them were the same during the 2 interview rounds. Some of them were not. And as you can see, there were 12 project participants in the first year, in 2014, and 16 in 2016, and then 9 in the final year we interviewed after they graduated and were in jobs. This contemplative teacher education project, it consisted of every month a full-day seminar with psychology theory lectures and with contemplative practices and with reflections and with application and development of some project-specific concepts. So a theory lesson could be about how children acquire relational patterns in interaction with parents, to understand that, to be able for the student teachers to understand their own patterns of interaction and immediate sense making. The contemplative practices included guided meditations focusing on breath or the body and what they labeled energizers, and a lot of cooperational activities and reflections on the student teachers' personal experiences of these activities, and then in group shared reflections where they also tried to apply the theories they had been introduced. So it was quite in-deep psychological education of students, teachers, which is quite uncommon in Denmark. What we found during this project was that initially, when the student teachers began their education, they were very occupied with classroom management. How can we use that in order to keep control in class? to make the students participant. And these strange contemplative exercises, can we use them with students in school? And they were actually split in two major groups. One of the groups, almost half of them, perhaps a bit more, were wondering quite a lot about what is this about? Can I use it? What does it? How do I experience it? And then a lot of them were quite skeptical, like, well, why do we have to breathe all the time? Can this make sense to me? Things like that. When we had the group interviews in 2014, the students here, they were still occupied with classroom management, but it turned out that they were very eager on relationship building. And they saw that as a very fundamental task of the teacher. The teacher is responsible for relationship building in the project participant classes. They also used contemplative exercises with students in school, and perhaps sometimes even mostly energizing exercises. But they also used, after these first 2 years, some of the contemplative exercises to calm themselves, to keep balanced in class, in challenging situations. And in this year, 2014, we interviewed 10 student teachers who went in classes that did not attend the project, and we interviewed 12 students who participated in the project. 9 of the 10 that I now call control group, those who did not attend the project, they were also occupied with interpersonal relationship building, but they saw it as something we all engage in, and it's a shared responsibility of me as a teacher and the children, the students in class. If they reject contact with me, then it's okay, it's not my problem. On the contrary, the students who participated in this project, they found it their responsibility to engage in changing in unsatisfying relationships. And when they had decided to do so, there were several examples where they described very high arousal. They were so nervous, they felt so insecure. What do I do if the children reject to participate? What can I do if they will not receive my invitation somehow? What can I do? And they also told how they tried to calm this nervousness or sometimes even panic by using some of the calming exercises, guided by the vocabulary and terminology of, for example, staying 60% at home in yourself and not any more than 40% in the other, because otherwise you cannot balance in the situation. So we labeled these two approaches to relationship building. Fortuitous relationship building, that's when it's a sort of shared responsibility, and as a professional, it's not my primary interest to improve relationships. Or intended relationship building, when they took it as a very serious task of the teacher. In 2016, there were some differences in the ways the project participants talked about the contemplative practices. It had become a kind of more habituated practice of themselves. They just did, for example, take a deep breath in order to restore calm when exaggerated. And in 2017, when we interviewed the newly educated teachers who had then worked about a year in school jobs, then it was very, very clear that they described several examples of relationship building where they used these calming practices with students, but also with colleagues in difficult intercollegial encounters, and also with parents. And it was as if it had become a kind of natural approach to them. So I've just taken one single quote from one of the participants. It is a young teacher who is in a meeting with a parent. This parent is a difficult parent for a teacher because she is a teacher herself. And she is very critical to the teaching staff because they think that her son will need some special needs education because he has some learning difficulties. And this young student teacher, he says that he could understand that she was sad. So he had to be patient because she was not angry with him personally. She was angry with a situation in which she felt very sad. And then he describes it like this: then she kept talking about all the things she thought we had done wrong. I listened and focused on what I could say to move the situation in a constructive direction. I really just sat there and tried to breathe deep down my belly without making it sound as sighs. Eventually, we came to an agreement on what to do for her son. And he also said that earlier on, my friends, they would never have thought that I could accept being scolded like that. So it really was another approach than what he had experienced earlier on. To sum up on the findings during this 5-year-long study, we could say that the participants in the project, they experienced the contemplative practices to support student attention in class and their engagement in school subjects when applied during their placement situations and later on after graduation when they worked as teachers. And their motives to engage in such situations with these exercises, but also in the relationship building situations, the motives refer to theory knowledge about relationship building, but not only theory knowledge, their own lived experiences with all the kind of experimental situations during the education, during the project, were very important for their reasoning for doing what they did. And the intended relationship building was very often experienced as quite challenging and difficult, but also as very important. So the contemplative practices in this study could help them balance difficult emotions in challenging situations, and they were guided by mediating means in symbols, for example, staying 60% in yourself, and embodied practices such as remember to focus on my breath, simply to breathe. And as we could see in the last part of the study from 16 and 17, it had been habituated to them to remember to breathe or to feel my feet in the floor in a difficult situation. Based on this study, I had some reflections with a colleague who studied preschool practices and practitioners in preschool and daycare and their experiences of what they consider challenging situations and what was in that context an intervention called self-compassion. But there were some strong similarities. And what we found was, first of all, that to be taught about things, to be sort of educated, as Professor Schechman just described to us, it may make you think a lot, like the thinker here, but it may be very difficult to find out what to do. So that these practices seem to fill in the doer's place in this illustration. And we found there were some commonalities across subjects, and that's what led us to the proposal of this concept of relational awareness. It specifies a conscious awareness of the experience of the embodied pre-reflective relational responsivity. And the relational awareness also involves embodied activity, which is mediated by methods of behavior, by motives, and social means of language and discourse, which is always also specific to the context and to the lived experiences of the person. And we consider that relational awareness and responsivity can become objects of reflection and education when educational practices include deliberate work on embodied experience and also include mediational means to reflect on and change the experienced encounters. So now I'll try to tie up. What's the contribution here when we think of development of school-based family counseling? As I began with, for the counselor, it's essential to build trustful relationships with the child and other important participants and stakeholders. And as Gerard and Soriano also writes, critical counseling skills to use are the client-centered therapy triad of empathy, warmth, and respect. But how do we do that? How do we act in that way? So I suggest that the concept of relational awareness can make us aware of how embodied contemplative practices can offer teachers and counselors a window to perceive our relational responsivity in challenging encounters and potentially balance, calm, and act deliberately as we want to in the situation with empathy, warmth, and respect. And finally, the concept, I hope, can be helpful as mediating means to understand embodied and affective responsivity, and also to practice meaningful embodied balancing activities, and to observe and contemplate on disturbances to support trustful relationship building with empathy and warmth, and at last, as a terminology to reflect on with difficult situations on in education and in supervision. So it's a bit away from the direct intervention, but this conceptualization is based on what we found studying an intervention in teacher education. And I'm so interested in hearing your potential questions and comments on this. My last comment will be that I don't intend with this to say that everybody should just start practicing mindfulness or compassion practices. I'm not talking for a specific program, but I think that everybody who has a therapeutic training also have strategies for how to restore calm. And we can learn a lot by looking into some of these programs who can guide newcomers into these kind of practices. So thank you very much. And I can see there is already a question. I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, we already have question, Michael, and then Karen. Please, Michael.
Hi, thank you.
And I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Michael. I just want to say that we are going to record the discussion. So if someone is not feeling comfortable with it, you can turn on your camera. Thank you. Please, Michael.
No problem. Thank you, Noreen. Thank you, Professor. It's really interesting work, and you were asking for some feedback. And one thing that I think is really interesting to take this work and think about it in terms of what we see in the United States and probably other places as well. I don't think the United States is unique in this, but there's a lot of emphasis right now on a few things that you kind of talked into. One is certainly mindfulness interventions itself, right? A lot of schools are adopting that. Another is trauma-informed care. And a third thing is the idea of self-care, which is often related to trauma-informed care for teachers. And what I think you've provided here is a really interesting way to conceptualize of what self-care looks like when you actually try to not be just the thinker, but the doer. And I really appreciate how you formulated that, because I think when teachers see themselves as not just being the people delivering the mindfulness interventions to the kids, but really doing it themselves, they begin, just like in our previous presentation from Dr. Sheckman, they begin to see the benefits because the kids relax more, the kids get more calm. So I really like how you frame that, and I also like the longitudinal nature of this. I like that you're getting into looking at outcomes longer term. So thank you for this. This is terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Karen?
Anne, thank you so much for this important work. And you have just got me thinking all over the place as someone who's been a teacher educator for many years. And so I want to do a little wondering with you here for a moment. So in the United States, we've been wrestling with teacher retention for years and years and years. We lose half of our teachers by year 3 or 4. And I know that's true for other countries as well. And so many things have been tried, and your presentation made me think about something. I'm wondering, here's my wondering. I'm wondering if we teach these very young teachers to stay in touch with themselves, that they actually stay in touch with their passion for becoming teachers, so that when they hit the high demands of the classroom that you talked about, I know our teachers are overwhelmed with the accountability measures and the high demands. Right now, a lot of them say, this is not what I signed up for. I'm out of here. So I'm wondering if we can keep them in touch with themselves and their original passion for teaching, if in fact, these kinds of practices that you're talking about teaching them could actually impact teacher retention down the road. And so I'm wondering what you think about that.
We have experienced the same thing in Denmark. There was some years in which there was a lot of newly educated teachers who reported that they found the working situations terrible, and with too little time to prepare and too little support from some kind of helpers. And this project began because of some of these reports. So it started out with an interest in what was at that time labeled relational competence, because it had been pointed out to be very, very important. And it's the same like as talking about socio-emotional competence, but to be able to build good relationships. And the terrible thing actually is that it was a new demand and nobody could tell how to do that. So the project and the intervention in this project actually grew out based on a very skilled psychotherapist who used some of the practices and tried to introduce how a psychological approach could help the student teachers to understand themselves as well as the students they were going to teach and some of the difficult situations. And some of them, they described how they said, well, this was a terrible situation. But then I thought, it's not the child, it's not me, it is the situation that is bad, and we can do something about it. So I think there is a hope in it, but this is not something that has been sort of adopted into the ordinary teacher education. There is an interest, but yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter, please.
Thank you, Nurit. And Annemai, good evening to you in Denmark. Building on your comments just now with Karen, what hit me most, I think, in your presentation was the idea of breathing deeply in to oneself as somebody is delivering negative emotions to me. And it strikes me that this practice will build enormous resilience in the person doing it. And that resilience, as you said in your response to Karen, just gives so many different opportunities for evaluating and narrating what is actually happening and what things there are to do about it. So I think, again, as with Zippy's intervention, these are things that can help the immediate situation and also carry forward into life and have lifelong benefits. Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And please, Kathy.
Well, I thank you so much, Anne. I think what you did was conceptualize an experiential set of experiences we had when we first started placing our family therapy interns in a school in Hartford. What we found, and it really supports what you're saying, that what we found was that the school where we were placing students, it was a kindergarten through 8th grade, and there were 26 languages spoken in this school. And it was a kindergarten through grade 8. And yet most of the teachers that were hired, the new teachers, were young, white, female, single teachers, and the turnover was so high. So what we did was at Central Connecticut State University, where I teach, we are very enamored with the idea of internal family systems and working with people's parts. And so what we did was one of our interns worked with a group of girls who were members of Hartford gangs in training. These girls would escape from class and hide in the bathroom and then terrorize other kids in the school. And terrorize the teachers. And so what we did was we had one of our interns begin to work with the teachers, and one of them started working with some of these students, worked on internal family systems, calming their parts that were getting agitated. They worked with them the whole year, and it was so successful that the principal asked to really incorporate it as a regular part of the training. And all 8 of the girls that were involved with recalcitrant acting out, etc., every single one of them graduated. And the girls themselves asked at the end of the year if they could train some of the 7th graders coming up in some of the same IFS calming down. And none of the teachers left that year that were part of this project as well. So it was a small study, but it was such a tribute to what you're talking about and its impact in education, how it can really make a difference. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Jackie, please, and then Tom will summarize.
Okay, thank you. This will be a quick one. Anna-Maya, it was a wonderful presentation, and basically following up on everyone that just commented. I've always noticed that when we were in the school-based family therapy program in San Francisco at our interns working with the students, anytime we wanted to do a sort of a study or a group effort or something that would be helpful with relational work, it was either successful if the principal or the administration accepted it, and it was a complete failure if we didn't get any support from the higher ups. And in your study, how is it in Copenhagen when people ask for these kinds of things? Is it always accepted that the teachers know better? You know, how did you get them to be so on target with this problem for 3 years?
This particular project was carried through at a teacher education college, which is situated in Aarhus. That's, 200 kilometers from Copenhagen. Denmark is a small country. But the management and the director and the teachers, they were all pretty engaged in the project. So the professors educating the student teachers were also offered the same kind of course activities. And some of them adopted these practices into their own classes. And they invited the students, that's some of the difficult things to report on, to take part in developing good practices to use didactically in their teaching. So it was a community engagement, as a matter of fact, even though there's only 2 classes out of, I believe they were 6 or 8 starting at the same time. But it was also a project that they had got some extra funding for. Wow. And that means that after the funding terminated, it's only what do you call it in English? In translate direct from Danish, we would say the sort of the firekeeper, those with the torch.
Right, carry the torch. It didn't carry the torch.
Yeah, a lot of them just sort of went into their usual kind of teaching, etc., etc.
Right.
So it's not a, but it has had some impact on ideas about teaching. It's not just so visible anymore as it was during this project.
Right.
But it's very important with the community backup and the leadership backup. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna-Mai. It's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And please, Tom, can you summarize?
Hello, Anne and everybody else. I'm Tom Buchanan. I'm a teacher educator in Portland, Oregon at George Fox University. And I loved this presentation. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation on relational awareness, particularly in emergent teachers, which is a passion of mine as well, being a teacher educator. So it was wonderful. I want to mention to you that you've developed a skill of presenting in a way with this beautiful, warm, rich voice that you have that causes us to trust you almost immediately. You have this warmth in the way you share, in the words you choose. It's just really very wonderful. And I'm sure that's something that you've worked at. I was especially immediately impressed with the fact that in your study, you followed students out of your classroom and on into the field, because I know that's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to trace teachers on into the field after they've been in your classroom. And so we appreciate your efforts as you did that. You did a really wonderful job at laying down the theory behind your research. In fact, this presentation was so dense, it felt a little bit like it was the first of an entire semester of study. Like you could have introduced this presentation today, it could have been your first day of class, and then we could just spend the next semester with you unpacking the theory and the study and everything behind it, because it was so rich with information. Something that really resonated with me was when you said that we all have the opportunity to become aware of our own dynamic processes that we bring to interactions with others. And I can so relate to that, because sometimes I'll just feel anxious and go, why am I feeling so anxious? And I'm just kind of unaware of what it is. I have to think about, what is it that just happened in my morning that's causing me to enter this next interaction feeling the way I do? And it's so good. I think about stopping and telling my emergent teachers that you really need to be aware of what you're bringing to every interaction. And I just see that as being so incredibly valuable. Another thing I really loved was when you talked about hanging on to 60% of yourself. And my daughter is a social worker and deals a lot with secondary trauma. And it's one of the things I just want to say to her every day. Remember to hang on to 60% of yourself as you're working with these challenges. I think one of the interesting things in the way your presentation fit together with the first presentation was that both presentations were a shift in trying to manage the other or trying to fix the problem in another, to taking responsibility for yourself and for what you bring to the problem. And I imagine over the next few days, that's a theme that we'll probably see come back over and over again, because we can't really control other people. All we can really do is control ourselves. And so there's so much value in saying, what do we do to control me as I bring myself into this situation? And I think that's of great worth. We need to take responsibility for ourselves, as you said, to act deliberately and with empathy and with warmth and respect towards others. And we need people like you to remind us of that all the time. Thank you so much for your presentation. Let's say thank you. And
Thank you all of you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Anne. And we have now, I'm not sure we have time now for break. So, and I can see that Laura is here, and I'm not sure I can see Otto. Laura, hi. Oh, here's Otto. Hi, Otto.
Hello.
So Laura and Otto is already here, and Nancy, I saw you. Yeah, I know, I saw you. Hi. So we will continue to our third lecture. We'll be on